He killed 300 monsters to save the alien twins. Their mother's reward was worth every wound asterisk. The Celestara's polished corridors gleamed under soft bioluminescent lighting, the scent of ozone and alien incense lingering faintly in the recycled air. Commander Stephen Rice stood at attention near the docking ring, his gray Terran composite armor freshly buffed, its silver accents catching the artificial starlight with every movement. At 6'4", he towered over most of the Virillian crew, his broad shoulders and military precision commanding unspoken respect. But inside, a quiet storm brewed memories he couldn't shake. A name he no longer said aloud. Jenkins. The airlock hissed open, revealing a procession of diplomats and aides, and at the center of them, High Counselor Adara Nixian emerged. She was breathtaking, not just by human standards, but in the way royalty carried centuries of power in a single glance. Her turquoise skin shimmered faintly under the ambient lights, and her snow-white hair flowed in carefully arranged waves. Down her back, adorned with delicate silver inlays that glinted with every step. But it was her eyes, large, violet, and unblinking, that landed on Stephen with unexpected intensity. Behind her, half hidden in the folds of her ceremonial lilac gown, stood two small girls, Lena and Fina, if Stephen recalled correctly from the briefing files. 8 years old, maybe 9 in human equivalents. Their matching silver dresses shimmered as they peeked out at him, wide amethyst eyes taking in the giant armored stranger. "Commander." "Rice," Adara greeted, her voice smooth and melodic, but laced with steel. "I was expecting a diplomat, not a soldier." Stephen gave a respectful bow, measured and precise. "High Counselor, Earth believes showing strength can sometimes prevent the need to use it." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. How very human. The formalities continued as dignitaries exchanged words, but Stephen remained posted near the chambers. Edge present, silent, watching. His job was to be a symbol, a reminder that Earth took this alliance seriously, that the Terran coalition hadn't forgotten the last time diplomacy failed and lives were lost, especially not his friend Jenkins, whose name still echoed in his mind like a scar that wouldn't fade. An hour passed. The chamber was filled with careful words, ceremonial tea, and subtle posturing. Stephen's eyes swept the room with military detachment, tracking exits, patrol paths, and concealed weapons standard procedure. His instincts had kept him alive in more war zones than he cared to count. Then the lights dimmed. At first, it was a flicker barely noticeable, but then the low thrum of the engines stuttered. A sharp chirp blared through the chamber. "The Celestaras." AI voice followed, shrill and unmistakable. "Proximity alert. Multiple unidentified vessels inbound. Defensive protocols engaged." Virillian guards reached for weapons. Adara stood abruptly, ushering her daughters closer. Stephen's sidearm was already in his hand. "Get her to a secure location," he barked to a nearby guard, moving toward the High Counselor. But he never made it. The far wall erupted in a blast of white-hot shrapnel. In a second, the chamber dissolved into chaos. Screams, smoke, fire. Dravex raiders swarmed through the breach, 8-limbed insectoids, hissing and chittering, mandibles twitching as they opened fire. Stephen dove, rolling into a crouch and taking down 3 in rapid succession, pulse rounds slamming into chitinous skulls. He spotted Adara across the debris-strewn room, shouting for her daughters, but a second explosion collapsed the floor between them. "Fina! Lena!" Stephen shouted. 2 small figures cowered beside an overturned bench, clutching each other as a Dravex loomed near. Stephen moved like a storm. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He charged. His blade hung to life in a blaze of energy as he closed the distance. One slice clean, brutal, and the creature fell twitching, scooping, Up the twins, one under each arm, he ran. The primary corridor was already sealed. Too many Draveks. No clear line to the escape pods. His eyes caught a blinking red panel maintenance shaft. He kicked it open, shoved the girls inside, and crawled in after them, just as claws scraped the floor behind him. "Stay quiet," he whispered, pressing his body between the hatch and... The girls were getting out of this. He didn't know how. He didn't know where they were going. But for the first time in a long time, Stephen Rice had something to fight for, not orders, not duty, but two small, terrified lives that now depended on him, and he'd be damned if he let them die. The maintenance shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for Stephen's armored shoulders. His breath echoed in the confined space, mixing with the faint whimpers of the girls crawling behind him. The acrid tang of melted wiring and scorched alloy filled his nose. Somewhere above them, the sounds of battle raged, pulse blasts, screeches, the shudder of the ship's hull under fire. "Where's Deck 7?" he asked, glancing back. "That's where the pods are, right?" Fina, the quieter twin, nodded. "Left junction, then the ladder down." Her voice was tight but steady. Lena clutched her sister's hand, eyes shimmering in the dark like amethysts in shadow. "Good." Stephen pushed forward, pulse pistol clutched in his free hand, the other bracing against the shaft wall. Every few meters, he paused to listen. Metallic groans, more distant explosions. The Celestara was taking a beating. He reached the junction and checked the corner. "Clear. Down we go," he murmured. "Ladder first. I'll follow." The girls moved with surprising speed, descending the narrow shaft with practiced grace. He suspected Adara had trained them children of a high counselor, likely learned survival young. Stephen dropped after them, knees absorbing the impact. The emergency hatch to Deck 7 loomed ahead. Smoke seeped through its seams. Stephen pressed a hand against the panel. "Hold on to me," he said, scooping both girls under his arms again. He kicked the hatch open. The corridor beyond was a nightmare. Bodies littered the floor, Virillion. Guards, civilians, and several Draveks, their twisted limbs still twitching. Sparks flew from broken conduits. Emergency lights bathed the hall in pulsing red. Stephen didn't hesitate. He moved fast and low, eyes scanning every shadow. The escape pod bay was 2 turns away. His boots splashed through pooled blood, every step jarring against cracked ribs and bruised muscle. From a side corridor, 3 Draveks emerged. One spotted him and let out a shriek, mandibles flaring. The others raised weapons. Stephen didn't stop. He dropped the twins behind a half-collapsed support beam and surged forward, pulse pistol raised. He fired twice 2 hits, 1 miss. The 3rd Draveks lunged at him with a vibro blade. Stephen met it with his own. The energy blade hissed to life as he parried, then spun low, slicing through the creature's legs. It shrieked and collapsed. He finished it with a stab through the thorax. Breathing. Hard, blood trickling from a fresh cut above his brow, Stephen turned. "Move!" The girls scrambled after him, staying low. They reached the pod bay just as another explosion rocked the ship. Emergency klaxons blared, and one pod slid into launch position, its hatch still open. "In!" Stephen barked, shoving the girls forward. They obeyed instantly, strapping in as the pod AI chirped warnings. Navigation system compromised. Life support nominal. Communications offline. Stephen sealed the hatch just as more Draveks appeared down the corridor. He slammed the eject. Button. The world tilted. The pod launched violently, inertia slamming Stephen against the wall. Through the viewport, the Celestara shrank behind them, smoke trailing from its hull. Distant flashes of combat still erupting. The planet below filled. The view a deep green sphere, wrapped in thick cloud cover. Stephen exhaled slowly. "We made it out," he said. Then, softer, "For now." The pod eye spoke again. "Warning. Heat shield integrity compromised. Emergency landing protocol engaged." The girls looked to him, faces pale, hands gripping the harness straps. "The planet safe?" Lena asked. Stephen didn't know. The scans were incomplete. No data. No guarantees. He reached over, buckling himself in with a hiss of pain. "It's going to be fine," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "I've survived worse, and now so will you." The pod shook violently as they hit atmosphere. Flames licked the outer shell. The sound was deafening. Stephen grabbed the girls. Hands and squeezed. "Hold on." The pod plummeted toward the jungle world below, trailing smoke, fire, and 3 lives clinging to a future yet unwritten. Asterisk. The impact came like a thunderclap, metal screaming, as the escape pod tore through the canopy of the unknown world and slammed into the jungle floor with a bone-jarring crunch. Stephen's vision blurred. The restraints bit into his chest. Air was filled with the acrid scent of scorched wiring and burning foliage. Then silence, save for the mechanical hiss of decompressing seals and the erratic chirps of damaged systems. He blinked against the red, emergency lights still pulsing. Overhead, pain lanced through his ribs with every breath. Copper filled his mouth, but he was alive. "Fina? Lena?" He rasped, twisting against the restraints. "We're okay," came a small voice. Lena's. She was still strapped in, shaken but conscious. Fina clung to her sister's arm, eyes wide but alert. "Are you hurt?" Stephen nodded vaguely. "Nothing that'll kill me." "Hang tight." He unbuckled and rose, every movement sharp with protest from bruised muscles and fractured bone. The escape pod was tilted to one side, embedded at an angle in a shallow ravine. The forward viewport was cracked, letting in shafts of alien light through vines and shattered foliage. A thump reverberated through the hull. Then another heavier. Slower. Stephen froze, drawing his energy blade. He edged toward the viewport, wiping soot from the cracked glass. Movement. Something large prowled outside, reptilian, scaled, and low-slung, with rows of serrated teeth and thick, muscled limbs. Its head turned, nostrils flaring, tasting the air. Predator. Stephen moved quickly. He grabbed the survival pack, a medkit, 2 ration bars, a water purifier, a multi-tool, and slung it over his back. 3 pulse pistol shots left. 1 working blade. He turned to the twins. "Listen carefully. Something's out there. This pod won't hold if it gets serious. We need to move. Now." Fina's lip trembled, but she nodded. "Where?" Stephen scanned the readout. No map, no guidance. Somewhere defensible. Rocks, a cave, anything with cover. He pulled the manual hatch release. A burst of hot, humid air rushed in, thick with alien scents, wet vegetation, iron-rich soil, and the faint copper tang of blood. He jumped down, blade humming. 3 creatures loomed nearby, raptor-like, about the size of Terran horses. They recoiled at the sudden movement, then regrouped, hissing and circling. "Go!" Stephen shouted. Rocks 50 meters. The twins leapt from the pod and sprinted across the uneven terrain. Stephen turned just in time to parry the first attack. A clawed limb slashed toward his head. He ducked, stepped inside, and drove the blade through its throat. It shrieked, convulsed, and dropped. The other 2 flanked. He backed away slowly, keeping between them and the girls. 1 lunged. He sidestepped, letting it overshoot, then slashed low, hamstring the beast. The 3rd snarled and darted forward. Blur of fangs and claws. He braced, then Lena's voice rang out. "Stephen, a cave." He turned and saw them tucked between the rocks. A narrow fissure leading into darkness. Stephen drove the blade into the final predator's gut, kicked it free, and ran. Blood his and theirs splashed the jungle floor. He reached the cave mouth, grabbed a jutting rock, and heaved himself inside, just as a guttural roar shook the jungle behind them. Something bigger had arrived. The entrance was narrow. The massive creature outside slammed into the rocks, unable to follow. Snarling, clawing, it scraped at the edges before finally retreating into the foliage. Stephen collapsed against the cave wall, panting, blood running down his arm in 3 long gashes. The girls huddled nearby, their small forms trembling but alive. "You're hurt," Fina said, voice small. "I'll live." He reached into the survival bag, fumbling for the medkit. His fingers were numb. "I've had worse. Let us help." Lena took the kit and knelt beside him, applying a gel to the wounds with surprising confidence. "Mother taught us basic field medicine, in case." She didn't finish the sentence. Stephen watched them work delicate fingers, eyes full of quiet focus, and something shifted in him. Not just duty, not just survival. These girls trusted him. Without hesitation, without question. "Will they come back?" Fina asked, looking toward the dark entrance. "Probably," Stephen replied, voice low. "But they won't get in. This entrance is too small for them. We're safe, for now." He leaned his head back, watching the faint glow from bioluminescent moss along the cave walls. His pulse slowed. His vision swam. "You killed so many," Fina whispered, awe in her voice. "I've never seen anyone fight like that." Stephen smiled faintly. "Just doing my job." "Do you think Mother's looking for us?" Lena asked. Stephen closed his eyes. "I know she is." Outside, the jungle stirred. And far above, the stars watched silently as a soldier turned savior guarded 2 small lives, already counting how many monsters he had yet to kill. Asterisk, a pale shaft of dawn filtered through the cave entrance, softening the jagged shadows cast by. The night. The air was cooler now, thick with a damp scent of moss and blood. Stephen Rice hadn't slept. He hadn't bared. His pulse blade rested across his lap, its charge almost depleted. Dried blood clung to the composite armor like war. Paint. His left arm throbbed where a claw had gouged deep, and his ribs ached with every breath. But he remained still, watching the cave mouth, eyes sharp and alert. The twins had curled against each other near the back wall, wrapped in the emergency thermal blanket from the survival bag. Despite the trauma, despite everything they'd seen, they'd finally succumbed to exhaustion. Stephen kept glancing over at them every few minutes, needing the reassurance of their slow, steady breathing. A low rumble in the distance stirred him. Engines, mechanical, not organic. He moved to the cave entrance and crouched, beyond the rocks. The jungle rustled, but not with the heavy footfalls of predators. Through a break in the trees, he caught a glint of metal sleek, iridescent armor. VRIN. He leaned back into the cave and gently shook the girls awake. Someone's landed nearby. "We stay quiet until we're sure who it is." The girls sat up instantly, alert. Lena's voice trembled. "You think it's her?" "I hope so." Stephen checked his pistol. 2 shots left, then stepped cautiously to the threshold. A figure emerged from the foliage tall, armored in the pearlescent design unique to the Virillian Confederation. Others followed, weapons ready but not raised. Then he saw her. High Counselor Adara Nixian strode through the jungle like a queen reclaiming her throne. Her snow-white hair was braided back into a sleek warrior's tail. Her armor, silver with indigo etchings, hugged her form with both elegance and lethal promise. She moved with purpose, eyes scanning, jaw clenched, pistol in hand. Virillian rescue team. Stephen called over his shoulder, relief thick in his voice. "Mother!" Lena cried, sprinting for the entrance with Fina right behind. Adara's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. "Lena! Fina!" She broke into a run, her guards struggling to keep up. The twins met her halfway, flinging themselves into her arms. Stephen stepped out last, slowly, his armor caked in dirt and alien blood. Adara was still on her knees, cradling the girls, pressing her forehead to theirs in a Virillian gesture of love. "Commander Rice," she said without rising. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "You brought them back to me." Stephen offered a tired smile. They did most of the work. Adara stood, her violet eyes sweeping over him. Her expression shifted from gratitude to something more intense as she took in the slashes across his chest. The ripped plating, the blood-slicked gauntlet. "You're wounded. I've had worse." His voice cracked with the weight of exhaustion. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing a fresh cut on his cheek that he hadn't even felt. The Nixian house does not forget debts paid in blood. Stephen's body stiffened as her touch lingered longer than necessary. He met her gaze, those starlit eyes, and felt something shift. A current passed between them, unspoken and raw. One of her guards cleared his throat. "High Counselor, we must move. Our stealth measures won't hold long." Adara nodded, but didn't look away from Stephen. "Prepare the shuttle." As the group made their way through the jungle, the extent of the carnage came into view. The path was littered with predator corpses, clawed beasts, scaled horrors, and apex monsters that towered over the treetops. Captain Thorne, leading the Virillian escort, stopped in disbelief. "By the eternal stars?" He counted bodies 20, then 30, then lost track. "You killed all these? Alone?" Thorne asked. "They were trying to eat your princesses," Stephen muttered. "I took exception to that." Adara didn't speak. She didn't need to. Inside the shuttle, the medbay scanned Stephen's injuries. Microdrones began sealing wounds with glowing polymers. He winced, eyes flicking to where Adara now stood at the foot of the bed, her expression unreadable. "The attack wasn't random," she said quietly. "It was targeted. My daughters. Me. An assassination attempt. Draviks don't do contracts. Someone paid them." Stephen's voice was low. "Housevex?" Adara's silence said enough. She moved closer, her armor removed, replaced by a sleek dark undersuit. Stephen sat up slightly, forcing eye contact. "I know about your husband," he said, "about how he died. It wasn't battle wounds. It was poison." Adara nodded, the air between them heavy. "I knew. I classified the report. If I had gone public, it would have ignited a second war. But justice isn't forgotten. It's delayed." "And the Thalian bond?" he asked carefully. "Is that justice or strategy?" Adara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's both, but it's also personal. You didn't just save my heirs, Commander. You carved a future out of a jungle full of death. That future includes you, if you want it." Stephen stared at her, at the faint shimmer of light beneath her skin, at the warrior and the mother, and the leader wrapped into one woman. His voice came out rough. "I didn't do it for a reward. I know." Her hand rose and rested lightly on his chest, above his heart. "That's why you deserve one." The shuttle lifted, engines humming as they broke through the atmosphere. Far below, 178 dead monsters marked the beginning of a bond no force in the galaxy would soon forget. Asterisk, they. Virillian shuttle sliced through upper orbit with liquid grace, its hull shimmering like polished starlight. Below, the predator world receded into a smear of green and shadow. Inside, Commander Stephen Rice sat on a bench near the forward viewport, watching the stars with unfocused eyes. Pain pulsed behind his ribs, but it wasn't the wounds that haunted him. It was the weight of what he'd just lived through. Across from him, Adara Nixian stood silent, her white braid draped over one shoulder, hands folded behind her back. Her daughters, finally asleep, lay curled beneath warm stasis blankets in the private family chamber. But Adara remained. She turned. "We arrive at the Nixian estate within the hour." Stephen nodded, still staring forward. "Feels like a lifetime. Since I was just a bodyguard in the corner of a negotiation room." "You're more than that now," she said, voice low. "To them." "To me." He looked at her then, really looked. Beneath the armor of politics and power was a woman stretched between two worlds, ruler and mother. Her amethyst eyes softened as they met his. "You've heard of the Festival of Ascension?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Religious?" "Cultural," she replied. 3 days of renewal, of transformation. It marks when we move from what we were into what we choose to become." Her eyes dropped to his bandaged hands. It would be a fitting time to finalize a Thalian bond. Stephen exhaled, sitting back. "You sure that's not just the diplomat in you talking?" Adara's lips curved, not quite a smile. "The diplomat in me wanted this bond a year ago for leverage. But the woman standing here wants it because of what I saw in the cave. In the blood. In the way you shielded my children when you had nothing left to give." She stepped closer. "When a warrior saves a family, they become part of it, not because of politics. Because of soul." Stephen studied her face, the glow of shiplight catching the faint silver flecks in her eyes. "I'm not good at belonging," he said. "I've spent a long time being useful instead of wanted." Adara reached up, touched his jaw lightly. "Then it's time you learned both." Before he could respond, a voice crackled over the intercom. "High Counselor, Commander, we have a situation." They both straightened as Captain Thorne's face appeared on the holopanel, his armor scorched and dusty. Behind him, sirens flashed inside the Nixian estate. Smoke drifted through distant archways. "Perimeter breach," Thorne said grimly. "House Vex. They've returned, and this time they're not hiding behind Dravex. They're bringing war." Stephen was already rising, checking his blade and pulse sidearm. "How many?" 24 confirmed. More landing. Elite teams. "This isn't a raid, it's an extermination." Adara's face hardened. "They're coming for my children. And for you," Thorne added. "The council vote to legitimize. Your Thalian bond ceremony, Vex, means to stop it before it shifts the balance of power." Adara turned to Stephen. "We fight." He nodded. "Together." Minutes later, they disembarked at the estate. The once pristine spires now glowed with flickering shields, the sounds of gunfire echoing through the lush gardens. The scent of burning flora choked the air. Stephen and Adara moved like twin storms, brutal and direct, her swift and surgical. Side by side, they carved a path through Vex's forces in the central courtyard. The battle reached a fever pitch. Pulse blasts lit up the trees. Virillian guards fell. Civilians scattered. Then came the moment Stephen feared. A cry. "Commander!" He turned sharply Lena and Fina, cornered by 3 masked soldiers. One grabbed Fina by the wrist. Stephen didn't think. He moved. He tackled the first soldier before the weapon could fire, his blade finding the soft seam between armor plates. The second tried to flank. Stephen ducked, rolled, then came up in a blur, slicing clean through the attacker's leg. The third grabbed Lena and held a blade to her throat. "Stand down. Human," the soldier hissed in Virillian. Stephen did Lena. To her credit, didn't scream. "I'll kill her." "You won't get the chance." The soldier blinked. Lena dropped her weight, suddenly just as Stephen moved. One shot. Clean. Between the eyes, the girl stumbled free into his arms. Adara appeared. Moments later, fury etched in every line of her face. "Where is Vex?" On the balcony, Thorne's voice came over the comm. "He's watching from above, waiting for you to fall." Stephen handed the girls to a guard. "Take them below." The old passage behind the fountain. Adara's eyes met his. "Let's finish this." They moved as one, ascending the estate's grand staircase under heavy fire. Stephen's armor cracked, his muscles screamed, but he pressed on Dot at the top. Vex awaited tall, armored, his silver blade gleaming. "You think your bond changes the old order?" He snarled. "You're filth. An outsider, a mistake." Adara stepped forward. "My children, my house, my choice." Stephen tossed aside his spent blade, drawing only a combat knife. "No tech?" Vex sneered. "Don't need it," Stephen growled. Their duel was brutal. Vex was trained, but Stephen was forged. Blades flashed. Blood spilled. Dot in the end. Vex fell to his knees, blade at his throat. "Do it." He spat. Stephen looked to Adara. She shook her head. "He faces justice." Guards arrived, seizing Vex. Dot as the battle ended. The estate burned, yes, but the family stood. Later that night, as the twins clung to their mother, Stephen stood at her side, bruised, bloodied, but whole. And when Fina looked up and said softly, "Do we still get to have the festival?" Stephen smiled. Not even a war can stop that. 3 days later, the Nixian estate stood reborn. The scorch marks had been cleared from its marble archways, the shattered domes reconstructed with new crystal latticework that glowed gently under the twin moons. Verdant banners fluttered in the warm breeze, each bearing the crest of House Nixian, intertwined with the silver eagle of the Terran Alliance, a symbol once unthinkable, now etched into history. The festival of Ascension had begun. The grand temple, carved into the mountain overlooking the estate, overflowed with Virillian dignitaries, diplomats, and off-world emissaries. Thousands had gathered, not just for ceremony, but for spectacle. A human flesh and bone from a distant, once primitive world was about to be bound into the oldest tradition of Virillian nobility. It was more than scandalous. It was transformative. Stephen Rice stood near the temple altar, armored not in war gear, but ceremonial plates of radiant blue and silver. The armor had been forged to match the flow of Virillian design, yet tailored to his human frame. At its center, the twin emblems gleamed over his heart. He had never felt more exposed. Ambassador Holden stepped beside him, adjusting his robes with a grin. "I thought it would take another 20 years to get Earth into Virillian aristocracy. And here you are marrying into the most powerful house after surviving a jungle full of death lizards." Stephen exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, really romantic stuff." Holden chuckled. "You look good in the armor. Almost like a legend." "I don't feel like one." "Good. The legends never do." A ceremonial horn echoed through the temple. The crowd turned. Stephen followed their gaze and forgot to breathe. Adara Nixian entered beneath an arch of woven starlight and bioluminescent flora. Her gown was spun from midnight blue and silver threads that shimmered like nebulae, every step precise, regal, unforgettable. Her snow-white hair was bound in a crown of crystal vines, and her amethyst eyes found his immediately. But it was what lay just beneath the gown that caught his breath. The subtle curve of her abdomen, barely noticeable, but to Stephen's eyes unmistakable. He swallowed hard. Lena and Fina preceded her, scattering petals along the aisle. They wore matching dresses of pale lavender and silver, their small faces alight with pride and joy. As they passed Stephen, they each gave him a wink and a thumb's dash up. His heart clenched. Adara reached him, and they stood together before the High Priestess, their hands joined. A bioluminescent cord wove around their wrists, glowing brighter as the priestess began the ritual. through battle, through blood, through bond. The priestess intoned, "You have earned what none have before." The Thalian bond is not only of house or blood, but of soul. Two become one. Warrior and shield, heir and protector, light and shadow. Adara looked up at Stephen. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready since the cave," he said softly. The final vow was spoken. The cord shimmered, then dissolved into radiant threads that absorbed into their skin. But just as the final blessing was about to be uttered, a shout echoed through the temple. "Hold!" Captain Thorne burst through the doors, armor scorched, weapon drawn. "High Counselor, Commander Vex has escaped. He's coming here." Gasps rippled through the temple. Panic stirred. Stephen's hand found the hilt of his ceremonial blade, functional beneath its decorative sheath. "How?" Adara asked, turning sharply. "Bribed guards. Outside support. He's brought mercenaries, Draviks, and worse." Stephen's eyes narrowed. "He's coming for the bond. For you. For the child." Adara met his gaze. "Then we finish this together." Moments later, the temple's glass dome shimmered as cloaked ships decloaked in the atmosphere. A dozen Earth Special Forces vessels Valkyrie Squadron descended. In perfect formation, Holden's voice crackled in Stephen's earpiece. "Consider it our wedding gift." Outside, the sky burned with fire and smoke as Virillian guards and Terran commandos fought side by side. Inside, Stephen and Adara led the defense hymn with a sword and pistol, her with speed, grace, and lethal aim. They fought through fire and blood to the temple steps, where Vex stood waiting. His once grand armor now dented, blackened his face, twisted by rage and failure. "You think this will change our world?" He hissed. "You think this half-breed child will be accepted?" Stephen raised his blade. "We're not changing the world. We're building a new one." Adara stepped beside him, voice steady. "And our child Callan Marcus Nixian Rice will be its future." The temple crowd, having returned to witness the battle's final moment, fell silent. The name rang out. Like prophecy, Vex lunged one final strike. Stephen blocked, turned, disarmed, and dropped him to his knees. Adara didn't hesitate. "Arrest him." As Vex was dragged away, Adara turned to Stephen. "The ceremony." He pulled her into a kiss before she could finish, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Later that night, beneath the moons and surrounded by their people, Adara rested against Stephen's chest. The twins curled beside them, and her hand rested over her womb. "You really killed 300 monsters," she whispered. Stephen kissed her hair. "Every one of them, worth every scar." And as the stars shimmered above, their new family born. Of blood, battle, and impossible love became legend.